Okay, so in the last lecture, I talked about this natural law theory idea that you're supposed to respect these intrinsic goods. And this is how natural law theory is going to set the moral rules, and it's also going to be how it explains them, right? These intrinsic goods are important. You ought to act in a way that shows respect for them. That's what will set the moral rules. The importance of these intrinsic goods will also be what explains the basis of the rules and why they're important. And so hopefully you can see natural law theory, even though in ways we're going to talk about it will bring God in, already it doesn't seem to directly depend on it, right? If you're explaining the importance of the rule, you're not saying, well, God commanded it. You're saying, well, this is part of human nature to want this thing. And, when you say, how do we know the rules? It's not, well, from God's commands necessarily. It's supposed to be about a fact of human nature. Look at yourself, look at other people. This is how you know these rules. Now, look. Some of you guys, I think, we're already going to be a bit skeptical about this. We will come back to it. I think maybe you should be skeptical. But before we do that, I want to get more deeply into this idea of respecting intrinsic goods, how natural law theory is going to work. The basic idea, as I said, is not that complicated, but when you get into the details, it will be a bit more complicated, and unfortunately, you can't really understand natural law theory without getting into the details. Now, I think a very good way to understand what natural law theory is about and how this concept of respecting the intrinsic goods is going to work is to compare it to consequentialism, to compare it to utilitarianism. Natural law theory will really differ from consequentialism on some claims. And seeing what claims those are and why it will differ will help us, I think, to understand this idea of respecting the intrinsic goods. All right. So natural law theory says we must respect the intrinsic goods. Well, some of what that means might be obvious. If you push a guy off of a pier into the ocean and watch him drown, obviously that doesn't respect human life, right? If you lie to somebody for the fun of it, obviously that doesn't respect human knowledge. But I think we need to say more. All right, so what does it mean to talk of respect? Well, for one thing, for natural law theory, respect for the intrinsic goods does not mean that you must bring about as much of each of them as possible. Respecting human life means when human life exists, you can't destroy it without very good reason, and you can only do that in very particular circumstances, which we'll talk about later, but it doesn't mean you have to try to bring about as much human life as possible. Natural law theory would not say that you have to have as many children as you possibly can. Respect for human knowledge does not mean that you need to devote your life to learning every random thing you can. Respect for human sociability certainly doesn't mean you ought to go out and join every single club you could join. Now, you can already see this is a difference from utilitarianism. Utilitarianism says, well, we value happiness, pleasure in the absence of pain. Well, utilitarianism is going to say, well, that means we ought to bring about as much happiness as possible. Natural law theory, on the other hand, will say, well, we value these intrinsic goods, human sociability, human procreation, human knowledge, human life. Sorry, I got those all out of order, but I think I did hit them all. But that doesn't mean we have to bring about as much of them as possible. Now, another important thing here, and I think this just goes from the very meaning of the word respect, it's not just what you do, but your reason or attitude matters. You know, respecting human life is not just a matter of not killing people or even saving people, it also matters why you do it. Respecting human sociability, not just a matter of not doing things that undermine it, your attitude also matters. And now, look, I'll talk about how this is going to work later. But I think this is a pretty basic idea. I mean, think about the very concept of respect. There's a difference between acting like you respect somebody and actually respecting them, right? I'll give you an example. At my old work, not at my current job at TCC, but at my old job, I really had no respect whatsoever for one of the people. He wasn't really my boss, but he did have some level of authority over me, right? We'll call, we'll call him Bill. His actual name is Adam, but we'll call him Bill, right? So, look, I think Bill is a complete idiot. I think he's a petty, shallow, mean person. I also think that, his scholarly work isn't very good. I have no respect whatsoever for this person. But I also thought, well, being petty, mean, shallow, and just generally a lousy person, Bill, sorry, I thought that he would, probably I should be careful how I walked around this guy because he would get back at me, right? So I was very careful, probably not as careful as I should have been, but I tended to treat him with a minimum of respect, right? I certainly didn't feel it, as you can tell, but I treated him with respect, right? I am not going to say to his face, I think you're an idiot, I think you're petty, your shoes are silly, and you're a bad Kant scholar. I believed all those things, I'm not going to say them. Had I been maybe more sensible than I am, I might have even kissed up to this guy. But I might be like, wow, your paper on Kant, that's really good. I love it, man. Those are great shoes. Where did you get them, right? All of that acts like I respect this guy, but in a very real sense, I'm not treating him with respect. I'm acting this way because I'm afraid of him, right? Not because I have any respect for him as a person. Contrast that with the way I feel about my current boss. I actually think my boss at TCC is great. She's a very smart person. She's good at her job. Probably doesn't hurt that, she played a role in hiring me. I'm biased, but, I like her. I not only like her, I respect her. And when I deal with her, I act with respect. I respect her opinion. And I don't do this because I'm afraid of her. I do this because I legitimately have respect for her as a person. I respect her judgment. I respect her character. Now look, I don't because I'm maybe not sensible enough to do this, but somebody who is more sensible than me, there might not be any difference at all in the way he treated his old boss and the way he treats his new boss. Acts the same way, but I think you could say there's a difference. In one case, he really respects this person. In the other, he doesn't, even though he acts like he does. And natural law theory will insist on that. There is a difference between acting as though you respect the intrinsic goods and actually respecting them. This distinction, in another way, the reason I spend so much time hammering on it is because it will be important for Kantianism as well. Kantianism won't talk about respecting the intrinsic goods, but respect will be important, and there will be a difference between acting in a way that like you respect something and actually respecting it. Anyway, hopefully the basic distinction's clear. I'll say a lot more about it. Now, one way this is going to be important this talk of respect, one way that it will really differ from consequentialism, from utilitarianism, is that natural law theory is going to say that there's a big difference between doing and letting happen. How's this going to work? Well, natural law theory will say, look, murdering one person so you can cut him up for his organs, that does not show respect for human life. That is wrong, no matter what. On the other hand, go back to a tweaked version of my antidote case. Imagine that you can save one heavily poisoned person or save 5 people who didn't get as heavy a dose. You would save the 5, right? Now, in a very superficial way, the results are the same between these two cases. One person dies to save 5. And utilitarianism, consequentialism, would treat them in the same way. Natural law theory will not, though. Murdering one person cannot possibly show respect for human life. But letting one person die because you would have to sacrifice 5 people to save him, well, that does show respect for human life. It can show respect depending on the way you sketch it, right? Now look, obviously, if you could save this one person without letting anybody else die, you'd have to. Letting someone die for no good reason does not show respect for human life. But letting someone die to save others, that might show respect for human life, even though murdering someone to save others would not. Hopefully that basic idea makes sense to y'all, and hopefully it shows you how natural law theory will draw a distinction between actually doing something and letting something happen in a way that utilitarianism cannot. Let me give you another example. Lying for natural law theory, if you try to tell somebody something that's false and get them to believe it, that fails to show respect for human knowledge. Natural law theory will draw a very hard line against lying. But look, whatever you think about lying, you would be crazy to think that, it's always wrong not to tell people everything you happen to know, right? There's a difference between if someone point blank asks you, what do you think of my clothes, or think of the job I'm doing, lying to them and out of the blue just telling them your opinion of what you think, right? Or to use another example, it might be if your brother shares a horrible secret, maybe not a horrible secret, but let's say he confesses to you that he's committed a crime, maybe he stole some money. There might be a big difference between lying to cover your brother's tracks and simply failing to go out and tell the police right now that he's committed a crime, right? And in fact, the law will say there's a difference. If you lie to help somebody, you're an accessory. If you don't, if you just don't tell on them, that's not illegal. Well, natural law theory can account for that, right? Lying fails to show respect for human knowledge, but simply failing to tell other people everything you know might not. Lying, trying to get somebody to believe something false, fails to show respect for human knowledge. Simply failing to tell someone everything you know might not. And I'll give you an example, right? So imagine this is a slightly tweaked example. Imagine that these people from an unjust regime, they're hunting for somebody. Well, natural law theory, if they point blank ask the person and they said, well, are you this person we're hunting? And he lied to them, natural law theory would say it's wrong. But if they ask him, if, say, they were going down this road, let's imagine he's a little further down the road than they are, and they said, well, is this guy we're hunting, is he further down the road? He is, right? And this guy says, well, yeah, you're right, he is. He's not telling them something, he's even letting them believe something false, but he's not lying to them, right? Natural law theory might allow that. So I know this is pretty complicated, pretty subtle, but hopefully you guys get an idea of the basic distinction. We think there's a difference between doing and letting happen. Natural law theory insists on that because of this distinction, this idea of respect. Again, you don't have to bring it about that as much human life as possible exists, or people know as much as possible, but you can't destroy human life, you can't lie to people. All right, this will become clear, I'll say a few more examples about this, but I hope the basic idea is clear to y'all. Finally, intention matters, and this will be important when we talk about the doctrine of double effect in the next lecture. But again, as I said before, with this basic idea of respect, your intention matters. And for natural law theory, the same actions, or at least actions with the same effects, might be importantly different depending on the reason behind them. For consequentialism, all that matters is what happens. For natural law theory, your reason for what you do matters. And I'll give you an example. Let's say, that a doctor has to decide who gets a life-saving treatment. And let's say that his reason is, between two people, he says, well, this one person is younger, he's in better health, I think his prognosis is better than this other person, this treatment is more likely to be effective if this younger, healthier person gets it than if the older person does. It's unfortunate, I wish I could save them both, but since I can't, I will give it to the person it's most likely to benefit. That shows respect for human life. His intention is to try to save a life. Contrast that with a doctor who says, well, this younger person, he's pretty important, his family's rich, if he gets the organ, they might be grateful, it might help me a whole lot in my career, I'm going to give it to him, right? Now look, the doctor does the same thing. He gives it to the younger, healthier person, but he has bad reasons to do it. His reasons don't make reference to the value of human life. In fact, they seem to ignore it. So even though it has the same effect, the younger, healthier person gets the life-saving treatment, a natural law theorist would say the second doctor has acted wrongly because he doesn't show in the way he thinks, in the way he reasons, the proper respect for human life. All right. Hopefully that makes sense to y'all. Will be important in the next lecture when we talk about the doctrine of double effect.